60 feet. To some people, that's just a distance you can throw a baseball. But in the world of property law, 60 feet is the difference between a peaceful retirement and a financial death sentence. I'm looking out my window right now at a line of mature oak trees that my grandfather planted in 1946. For 70 years, those trees were the boundary of our family farm at number 752. Today, they're sitting behind a locked wrought iron gate that I didn't build on land that I still pay the property taxes for. My neighbor, a woman named Miriam Gable, and her aggressive city slicker son, Brent, managed to swallow 60 feet of my pasture using nothing but a trowel, a few tomato plants, and my own damn sympathy. I watched them do it. I let it happen because I thought I was being a good Christian neighbor. Now they're suing me, claiming adverse possession, a fancy legal term for I've been stealing from you so long that the dirt is now mine. They think because I'm 67 and walk with a limp that I've forgotten how to fight. They think those 60 feet of prime Pennsylvania topsoil are their new sunroom and rose garden. What they don't know is that while they were busy planting hydrangeas on my heritage, I was spending my savings on a historical survey and a legal trap that is about to snap shut on their bank account. Stay with me, because I'm going to show you exactly how a little garden turned into a legal war and how I'm about to make my neighbor pay for every single inch of my stolen dirt. I've lived at 752 my whole life. When Miriam Gable moved into the small cottage at 758 12 years ago, she seemed like a harmless widow. She asked if I minded if she planted a few little flowers near our shared line to attract butterflies. I told her, "Miriam, help yourself. As long as the cows can't eat 'em, I don't care." That was my first mistake. In the suburbs, kindness is seen as a weakness, and Brent, her son, who moved in 2 years later after his tech consulting firm went bust, saw my kindness as an open invitation to expand their kingdom. Strike one, the friendly handshake. About 5 years ago, I noticed Miriam's flower beds had moved. They weren't just near the line, they were 5 feet into my grazing pasture. She'd put up a little decorative wooden lattice. It was flimsy, but it was a marker. I walked over one afternoon. I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought a bag of apples from my orchard. "Miriam," pointing at the lattice, "those petunias are looking great, but you're drifting into the north pasture. The tractor needs room to turn there." Miriam gave me a sweet, frail smile, but Brent stepped out from behind her. He was wearing a Bluetooth headset and a $200 pair of sneakers. "Jack, buddy, it's 5 feet of weeds. Mom's just beautifying the area. It's bad for the neighborhood property values." I let it slide. I thought, it's just 5 feet. It's an old lady. Strike two, the formal letter. 2 years later, the beautification became an occupation. Brent hired a crew to install a permanent 6-foot-tall privacy fence. They didn't put it at the 5-foot mark. They put it 20 feet into my land. They effectively fenced off my best watering hole for the cattle. I went into my office, pulled out the original 1946 deed, and wrote a firm, typed letter. I told them they had 14 days to relocate the fence to the deeded boundary, or I would involve the county. I drove over and handed it to Brent personally. He didn't even open the envelope. He leaned against his Audi and looked at me like a beggar. "Jack, I looked at the maps online. According to the satellite view, this has been garden space for years. You've acquiesced to the use of this land. My lawyer says we have a strong case for an easement." He dropped the envelope into his outdoor fire pit in front of me. I watched the legal description of my own land turn into ash. Third strike, the digital record. By last year, the fence was gone, replaced by a stone retaining wall and a glass greenhouse. They had taken 60 feet. My pasture was a third smaller, and my property tax bill, which I was still paying in full, felt like a joke. I sent one last email to Miriam's estate and Brent. I attached a scanned copy of my tax receipts, proving I paid for 40.5 acres, not 39.5. I told them this was their final chance to settle before I filed an encroachment suit. Brent's reply was 3 words: "See you in court." He attached a photo of his own crude survey his friend had made, and claimed that because they had maintained the land for over 10 years, the law of adverse possession made it theirs. That was it, the third strike. They weren't just taking my land, they were trying to use the law to make me pay for the privilege of being robbed. I woke up the next morning with a fire in my gut that I haven't felt since I was a young man. But the path to justice in this country isn't a straight line. It's a swamp of red tape. I spent the next 3 days at the county records office in the city. If you've never been there, count your blessings. It's a basement room that smells like wet concrete and despair, filled with heavy metal cabinets and clerks who look like they haven't seen a sunlit window since 1994. I need the original subdivision plat for the Dalton tract, 1946, I told the woman behind the desk. Her name tag said Marge. That's in the deep archives, honey. The computer system is being upgraded. Come back in a week. I didn't come back in a week. I sat in one of those hard plastic chairs for 7 hours. Eventually, Marge got tired of seeing my face. She disappeared into the back and came out with a dusty leather-bound book. Inside was the truth. The ink had faded to a pale ghost gray. I had to use a magnifying glass to trace the meets and bounds, old language about starting at the large rock by the creek and heading 40 degrees toward the lightning-struck elm. The problem? The creek had shifted after the flood of '72, and the elm tree was a stump. I felt a cold sweat break out. If I couldn't prove the starting point, the 60 feet stayed with Miriam Gable. I went home and sat in my dark living room staring at the wall. I thought about giving up. I thought about how much easier it would be to just live my final years in peace. But then I thought about my granddad. He'd cleared that land by hand. I hired a specialist, a surveyor named Caleb Murphy. He was 80 years old and charged $3,500 just to show up. He didn't use GPS. He used a metal detector and a shovel. We spent 2 days in the mud, digging for the iron pin, the original stake buried in 1946. Brent watched us from his greenhouse, sipping a green smoothie and laughing. "Give it up, Jack. You're digging for ghosts." On the second day, 4 feet underground, Caleb's detector screamed. We dug, and there it was, a rusted solid iron rod, exactly where the 1946 deed said it should be. It was 62 feet inside Brent's new rose garden. Caleb said, wiping the mud off the pin, "This isn't just a garden. This is a crime scene. Now you just need to decide how hard you want to swing the hammer." I felt a strange, cold calm. "Caleb," I said, "I want to swing it hard enough that they can hear it in the next county." For 3 weeks after Caleb Murphy found that iron pin, I didn't say a word. I went back to my life at number 752, but I was a man haunted. I'd sit on my porch at sunset, watching the masons lay that Vermont slate for Brent's new patio, and I'd feel a bitterness in my throat. Every time a truck from Elite Stone pulled into the Gables drive, I felt a physical pang. I'd spent $3,500 on Caleb, money I'd set aside for a new transmission for the tractor. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, convinced I'd made myself a fool. What if Caleb's equipment was off? What if Brent's lawyer finds a loophole? I felt like a ghost on my own property. Then the first shot was fired from their side. I got a letter in the mail from a law firm called Hart and Associates. It was a formal notice claiming my old wire fence was a nuisance to Miriam Gable's lawfully maintained garden. They were demanding I pay half the cost to replace it with a privacy wall placed exactly where their garden ended. I sat at my kitchen table and my hand started to shake. They weren't just stealing the land, they were trying to make me pay to seal the deal. I almost called Attorney Vance to tell him to drop the whole thing. I almost folded. But then I looked out the window and saw Brent. He was standing on my dirt, pointing at my barn and laughing with a guy in a suit. That suit belonged to a bank appraiser. The fire came back, and this time I wasn't going to let it go out. I knew Brent was trying to get a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. You don't build a $12,000 outdoor fireplace when your last 3 startups went bust. He needed that bank money. On a Wednesday morning, I saw the appraiser, a man named Mr. Sterling, walking the yard. Brent was right beside him, gesturing wildly toward the pasture. I grabbed my manila envelope and walked down the porch steps. "Morning, fellas," I said. Brent's face dropped. "Jack, we're busy, private business." I ignored him and looked at Mr. Sterling. "I assume you're valuing this lot based on the improved square footage, the patio, the stone fireplace, the greenhouse?" Mr. Sterling nodded. "It's a significant addition to the value. Why?" I said, "Because you're measuring my pasture." I pulled out the 1946 deed and Caleb Murphy's notarized survey. I spread them out on the hood of the car. "I'm Jack Dalton. I own the 40 acres next door. That stone fireplace, it's 62 feet past the deeded property line." Brent stepped toward me. "Don't listen to this guy. He's senile. We've used this land for 12 years. Established use boundary." "Adverse possession." "Brent," I said, "adverse possession in Pennsylvania is 21 years. You're 9 years short. And Mr. Sterling, ask him to show you the tax receipts. I've paid the taxes on every square inch of this dirt for 40 decades. The bank isn't going to like lending money against a collateral that someone else is paying the taxes on." Mr. Sterling stopped his wheel. He looked at the survey, then at the bright pink ribbons Caleb had left in the grass. "Brent," Sterling said, his tone turning cold, "did you disclose an encroachment issue on the application?" "There is no issue," Brent yelled. "It's a neighborhood dispute." "It affects the title," Sterling replied. "I can't complete this valuation with a cloud on title of this magnitude. If that structure is on the neighbor's land, it's not an improvement, it's a liability." Brent looked like he wanted to swing at me. He was spitting mad, but the appraiser just packed up and drove off. That was the first crack in Brent's armor. The next month was a slow-motion car crash for Brent. He hired a big-shot lawyer from Philly who tried to bury me in paperwork. They filed a counterclaim for a prescriptive easement. My lawyer, Attorney Vance, just smiled. "Let them spend their money, Jack. The law is slow, but it's heavy." We didn't just wait for the court date. We went to the county zoning office. Brent hadn't pulled a single permit for that fireplace or the greenhouse. The county inspector showed up 10 days later. He didn't care about butterfly gardens. He saw a masonry chimney built within the 25-foot setback. The county slapped a notice of violation on Miriam Gable's front door. $500 a day in fines until the structures were remediated. Brent tried to fight the insurance next. I'd called Miriam's carrier and reported the fireplace as a fire hazard on my land. Their underwriter realized if that chimney caught my barn on fire, they would be the ones paying millions. 4 days later, the nuke went off. Miriam got a cancellation notice for her homeowner's insurance. Without insurance, the bank, who already had a hold on his file, notified Brent that he was in technical default on the mortgage. They gave him 30 days to either get insurance or pay the balance of the loan. Brent came over to my yard one last time. He looked like he'd been dragged through a briar patch. "You're destroying my mother's life over a strip of grass, Jack," he said, his voice cracking. I looked him in the eye. "I'm not the one who built a fireplace on someone else's dirt to impress a bank, Brent. I gave you 3 chances. You chose to be a businessman. Well, this is just business." The demolition crew arrived on a Monday. It took 4 days to undo 12 years of creeping. The jackhammers were the loudest part. Every thud felt like a weight being lifted off Granddad's land. I didn't hide inside. I sat on my porch and watched every piece of slate get loaded into a dumpster. Some of the neighbors thought I was a curmudgeon, but the old-timers, the ones who knew Granddad, they'd drive by and just nod. By Friday, the 60 feet were bare dirt. Brent and Miriam Gable sold the place a month later. They moved away in the middle of the night. The new neighbor is a young man named Ben. The first day he moved in, he brought a surveyor's map and a level. "Mr. Dalton, I'm putting up a small shed. I want to make sure I'm exactly 15 feet back from your pin. Would you mind double-checking with me?" I stood up, grabbed my old tape measure, and smiled. "Ben," I said, "I think we're going to get along just fine." I still walk that line every night. The grass is growing back over the spot where that fireplace once sat. It's just dirt and weeds now, but to me, it's the truth. So I'm asking you, those of you who still believe that your word and your land matter, was I too hard on them, or is a boundary the only thing that keeps us from losing who we are? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading them all. And remember, keep your eyes on the pins.